In a survey conducted in 2005, 38% of rural police departments in the United States reported at least one call involving an animal, later misidentified as something unknown. That statistic is not proof of monsters, but it is the soil from which the profession of the monster hunter has always grown. And this is the life story of that profession. It was born long before it had a name. The problem that created it was simple. People heard something in the dark that did not fit the known catalog of teeth and claws. In medieval Europe, wolves accounted for hundreds of documented deaths between the 14th and 17th centuries, and fear filled the space between tracks in mud and the edge of firelight. A lesser-known detail of those wolf hunts is the design compromise of early pikes. Many were shortened from 4.5 meters to under 3.5 meters because dense forests of Central Europe made longer shafts impractical in close pursuit. The parents of monster hunting were not myth, but necessity, agriculture, livestock economy, and the doctrine of perimeter defense around villages. In 18th century France, the beast of Gavardin was blamed for more than 100 attacks between 1764 and 1767. Though estimates vary regarding fatalities, hunters organized not as folklore heroes but as militias, with quotas and bounties paid by regional authorities. A lesser-known production issue of those hunts involved musket ball shortages during winter campaigns. Parish records show requisitions diverted from militia stockpiles to hunting parties, creating tension between civil defense and creditor control. Across the Atlantic, frontier life in North America expanded the concept. By 1800, wolf populations in the eastern United States had already begun to decline sharply due to organized eradication programs. Bounty systems in states like Pennsylvania paid up to $8 per wolf scalp in the early 1800s, a substantial sum when daily wages hovered near $1 a yay. Lesser-known training detail of those early hunters was the emphasis on reading wind language, a formalized method in some trapping manuals that required recruits to pass practical scent drift tests before joining organized hunts. In Japan during the Edo period, specialized bear hunters, known as matagi, developed a ritualized system of pursuit in the mountains of Tohoku. Brown bear attacks were rare but severe, and entire villages sometimes participated in coordinated drives. The matagi tradition included detailed knowledge of snow density and avalanche risk. A lesser known, where the impact of those hunts was the documented correlation between heavy snowfall years and increased bear encounters. As delayed hibernation cycles pushed animals closer to settlements, the word monster evolved, but the work remained grounded in biology and fear management. In 19th century India, British colonial records describe tiger hunts undertaken not for sport alone but in response to man-eaters that killed dozens. The Champawat tiger was officially credited with 436 deaths before being killed in 1907. The response involved trackers, beaters, and coordinated rifle fire. A lesser-known countermeasure adopted in several provinces was the use of elevated bamboo platforms positioned along known kill routes, reducing ambush risk by forcing tigers into open sightlines. By the late 19th century, industrialization changed. The hunt, rifled barrels improved accuracy dramatically. Effective engagement range increased from roughly 50 meters with smoothbore muskets to 200 meters or more with modern rifles. Professional hunters began to document methods in printed manuals. A lesser-known test result from British India showed that soft-point bullets increased immediate stopping power against large predators by an estimated 20% compared to full metal jacket rounds. Shape and ammunition doctrine for dangerous game. Yet the profession did not stabilize into a single identity. In North America, the extermination of wolves and cougars by the early 20th century created an ecological imbalance. Deer populations exploded in some regions. Government hunters were rebranded as wildlife managers. A lesser-known command doctrine shift occurred in 1934 with the creation of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which redirected federal policy from eradication to regulated conservation. fundamentally altering the mission of those once called monster hunters. The childhood of the modern monster hunter was awkward and conflicted. In the early 20th century, newspapers sensationalized cryptid sightings Mothman in West Virginia during the 1960s. The Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. Beginning in 1933, amateur investigators flocked to sites with cameras and notebooks. A lesser-known production issue of early photographic expeditions was the limited film sensitivity. Many cameras operated at ISO levels under 100, requiring long exposures that blurred moving subjects and contributed to misidentification. Training realities were inconsistent. Some investigators came from military backgrounds, others from zoology or journalism. In 1958, the Bluff Creek footprints in California ignited the legend of Bigfoot. Plastic casts were taken, measurements recorded at roughly 14.5 inches in length. A lesser-known design compromise of early footprint casting involved the use of dental plaster not intended for field moisture conditions, which often caused distortion. At the edges and reduced evidentiary value. The Cold War added a strange dimension. Unidentified flying object reports surged after 1947, with the Roswell incident marking a cultural inflection point. The U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book investigated 12,618 sightings between 1952 and 1969. A lesser-known supply constraint of that program was staffing. At its peak, only a few dozen analysts processed thousands of reports annually, leading to backlogs that shaped public perception of secrecy. Early misunderstandings shaped identity. Many self-styled monster hunters pursued hoaxes. In 1995, the Alien Autopsy film aired on British television drew millions of viewers before being widely discredited. A lesser-known psychological effect documented in follow-up studies showed that approximately 30% of viewers retained partial belief even after exposure of the hoax, illustrating the durability of narrative overcorrection. Growth came with technology. By the 1980s and 1990s, thermal imaging devices became commercially available, initially derived from military surplus. Detection of heat signatures at distances exceeding 300 meters transformed night searches. A lesser-known battlefield metaphorically from infantry practice was the grid search pattern applied to wooded terrain, dividing forests into 50 by 50 meter sectors to ensure systematic coverage. Mass production of equipment changed the culture. Trail cameras, introduced widely in the early 2000s, allowed motion-triggered photography with infrared flash. By 2015, annual sales of such cameras in the United States exceeded 1 million units. A lesser-known production issue involved battery drain in cold weather. Lithium cells performed up to 40% better than alkaline alternatives below freezing, affecting deployment strategies in northern climates. Standardization followed. Organizations formed with codes of conduct, data logging protocols, and evidence submission guidelines. GPS units provide a coordinate precision within 3 to 5 meters. A lesser-known crew training detail in several reputable cryptozoological groups required members to complete basic wilderness first aid certification, reflecting an acknowledgement that terrain posed greater danger than any alleged creature. Logistics matured quietly. Drones equipped with 4K cameras expanded aerial reconnaissance. Flight times averaged 25 to 40 minutes per battery cycle. Operators learned to manage wind drift and signal interference. A lesser-known countermeasure adopted against wildlife disturbance was the use of low-noise propellers, reducing acoustic signature by several decibels to avoid scattering animals, whose sudden movement could produce false sightings. Peak effectiveness arrived not in confrontation, but in debunking. In 2012, a widely circulated image of a Montana river monster was traced to a known species of sturgeon through comparative scale analysis. Investigators used photogrammetry to estimate length at approximately 2.4 meters. A lesser known Test result from that analysis demonstrated that water refraction can exaggerate apparent size by up to 25%. A finding later incorporated into training materials. The defining battlefield. Scenario of modern monster hunting is a wooded clearing at 2:17 in the morning. Thermal scopes sweep arcs of darkness. Audio recorders capture frequencies from 20 GE upward. Adrenaline spikes at every snapped twig. A lesser-known medical detail is that heart rate during nocturnal stakeouts often exceeds 110 beats per minute for extended periods, impairing fine motor control and judgment. Why did it work? At its peak, because it shifted from pursuit of the unknown to documentation of the known. In 2014, DNA analysis of alleged Yeti hair samples published in a peer-reviewed journal identified sequences matching ancient polar bear lineage in one case and common animals in others. A lesser-known design compromise in field DNA kits is the sensitivity to contamination. Even trace human skin cells can overwhelm low-quality samples, leading to false positives. The cost of the profession has rarely been discussed. Physical risk in wilderness search includes hypothermia, falls, and animal encounters. In the United States, search and rescue statistics indicate that more than 3,000 missions annually involve lost or injured hikers. A lesser-known psychological effect among long-term investigators is sleep disruption. Irregular nocturnal schedules have been associated with increased anxiety and reduced cognitive performance. Fatigue accumulates. Equipment weighs between 15 and 25 kilograms when including cameras, batteries, first aid kits, and communication devices. Repeated night operations, strained vision, and hearing. A lesser-known terrain impact arises in swamp environments where methane bubbles can produce spontaneous light phenomena known as will-o'-the-wisp, historically interpreted as supernatural but now understood chemically. Fear is contagious. Group dynamics in isolated settings amplify suggestion. Studies in social psychology show conformity rates exceeding 30% in ambiguous situations. A snapped branch becomes a shared certainty, a lesser-known countermeasure. Taught in some investigative teams is the use of independent observation logs written silently before discussion, reducing cross-contamination of memory. Old age of the traditional monster hunter began with broadband internet. High-resolution cameras and smartphones democratized documentation. By 2020, more than 3 billion people carried devices capable of instant video capture. A lesser-known supply constraint of earlier decades, the scarcity of recording equipment vanished, shifting the challenge from obtaining evidence to filtering abundance. New tactics emerged. Machine learning algorithms analyze thousands of hours of wildlife footage to identify species automatically. False positives are flagged by pattern recognition systems trained on millions of images. A lesser-known command. Doctrine shift within some investigative communities has been the integration of academic collaboration, inviting biologists and statisticians into what was once an insular culture. Replacement has not meant extinction. The profession has bifurcated. On one side stand entertainers producing content for digital platforms. On the other, researchers committed to biodiversity discovery. Since 2000, more than 18,000 new species have been described globally each year. On average, a lesser-known production issue in taxonomy is the backlog of undescribed specimens stored in museum collections, estimated in the millions, suggesting that unknown creatures often reside in drawers rather than forests. Legacy is measured not in trophies but in skepticism. The language of monster hunting has influenced wildlife conservation campaigns, transforming fear into curiosity. Public interest in cryptids has drawn attention to habitat preservation in regions like the Pacific Northwest. A lesser-known weather. Impact of increased ecotourism is soil compaction in frequently visited sites, altering root systems and indirectly affecting animal movement patterns. What later designs copied was not the hunt but the method. Documentation, peer review, chain of custody for evidence. Modern citizen science projects borrow heavily from these protocols. Platforms such as a naturalist host over 150 million observations worldwide. A lesser-known crew training detail among top contributors is the emphasis on photographic angles, capturing scale references, a practice inherited from early footprint casting lessons. Militaries learned something too, though indirectly. The discipline of night observation, thermal detection, and pattern analysis migrated from battlefield to hobby and back again. Dual-use technology, blurred lines, a lesser-known design compromise in civilian thermal scopes as resolution. Consumer models often operate at 320 by 240 pixels compared to 640 by 480 or higher in military systems, affecting identification accuracy. The Monster Hunter began as a response to wolves at the gate and evolved into a mediator between myth and measurement. It grew through era, adapted through embarrassment, and matured into something quieter. A lesser-known psychological effect of prolonged engagement with mystery is humility. Surveys of long-term investigators reveal a trend toward reduced certainty over time rather than increased belief. In the end, the profession did not slay monsters so much as it narrowed the space in which monsters could live. Forests still hold shadows. Oceans still conceal species yet unnamed. A lesser-known statistic from marine biology estimates that over 80% of the ocean remains unmapped in detail, reminding us that ignorance is vast but not supernatural. The life story of the Monster Hunter is therefore not a tale of triumph over beasts. It is the biography of a human impulse, to step toward the noise instead of away from it, to measure instead of imagine, and to accept that sometimes the creature in the dark is only a bear, and sometimes the greater danger is the story we tell about it. In 1892, the annual report of the Smithsonian Institution quietly noted that more than 1,200 biological specimens had been misclassified in American collections over the previous decade. That number matters because the modern guide from a monster hunter is not about killing what hides in the dark, but about correcting the record of what was never understood. By the late 20th century, the profession had absorbed enough embarrassment to evolve a code. The problem was no longer wolves at the edge of farmland. It was misinformation moving faster than fact. In 1967, the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot on 16mm stock at Bluff Creek, California, lasting 59.5 seconds and becoming the most analyzed piece of alleged cryptid footage in history. A lesser-known test result from later biomechanical studies showed that the stride length, visible in the film estimated at roughly 1.14 meters, fell within the upper range of a tall human male wearing extended footwear, undermining claims of non-human gait mechanics. The parents of this mature phase were technology and skepticism. Camcorders in the 1980s, then digital sensors in the 1990s, reduced cost barriers. By 2000, consumer camcorders were available for under $500. At the same time, academic biology expanded rapidly, with global species catalogs becoming more accessible. A lesser-known production issue in early digital cameras involved roll and shutter distortion, which could elongate moving objects and create misinterpretations of size or speed in low-light recordings. Early adopters of the new doctrine faced a credibility gap. Television programs dramatized investigations, often editing hours of silence into minutes of tension. Viewer numbers mattered. A successful cable episode in the early 2000s could draw over 1 million viewers in a single airing. A lesser known command doctrine shift occurred within several serious investigative groups around 2008, when they began releasing full, unedited field footage online to counter accusations of selective editing. Training became more formal. Field teams adopted standardized data sheets recording temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, moon phase, and GPS coordinates. A typical overnight operation could generate 20 to 40 gigabytes of audio and video data. A lesser-known supply constraint was data storage. Before affordable terabyte drives became common around 2010, many teams overwrote earlier recordings due to limited capacity, erasing potentially useful comparative baselines. Small changes mattered more than dramatic gear. The addition of decibel meters allowed investigators to measure reported howls or screams objectively. Known species such as red foxes can produce vocalizations exceeding 100 decibels at close range, often mistaken for something unnatural. A lesser-known weather impact influencing sound perception is temperature inversion, which can carry noise over several kilometers at night, displacing its apparent source and complicating localization. Growth of the profession did not mean growth of evidence from monsters. Instead, it meant growth of process. Chain of custody procedures were adopted from forensic science. Every physical sample was bagged, labeled, and logged with timestamps. In laboratory settings, polymerase chain reaction PCR techniques could amplify tiny DNA fragments within hours. A lesser-known design compromise of field PCR kits is their vulnerability to humidity. Failure rates increased significantly above 80% relative humidity, a common condition in swamp or rainforest environments. Mass production of drones changed search geometry. Quadcopters capable of stable hover at 50 meters altitude provided overhead views of terrain previously accessible only by helicopter. Battery cycles averaged 30 minutes, requiring rotation schedules for extended operations. A lesser-known crew training detail involved certification under Federal Aviation Administration Part 107 rules in the United States, ensuring legal operation and reducing risk of fines that could exceed $1,000 per violation. Manuals expanded. Risk assessments included wildlife density statistics. In parts of Alaska, brown bear populations are estimated at over 30,000 individuals statewide. Teams carried bear spray with a typical effective range of 9 to 12 meters. A lesser-known countermeasure widely adopted in grizzly territory is the use of tripwire perimeter alarms around campsites, a borrowed technique from military field security, adapted to wildlife deterrence. The system around the hunter matured further with collaboration. Audio analysis software could convert raw sound into spectrograms, revealing frequency bands. Known barred owl calls, for example, clustered within specific kilohertz ranges. A lesser-known test result from university-led reviews of alleged unknown. Primate recordings showed consistent overlap with known owl and coyote signatures when analyzed blind by independent bioacoustics experts. Peak effectiveness of the guide from a monster. Hunter is quiet and procedural. Imagine a report of livestock mutilation in a rural county. Carcasses drained of blood, precise incisions, no tracks visible. Historically, such events fueled extraterrestrial narratives, yet veterinary studies in the 1970s and 1980s documented that natural bloating and scavenger activity can produce clean-edge tears and apparent exact. A lesser-known medical detail is that post-mortem pooling of blood, known as livor mortis, can create the illusion of absence when blood has simply settled internally in defining moments. The modern hunter explains rather than confronts. In 2019, a viral video of a sea monster off the coast of Japan was widely shared before marine biologists identified it as a decomposing basking shop, a species known to reach lengths over 6 meters. Decomposition can cause the lower jaw to detach, altering silhouette dramatically. A lesser-known terrain impact in marine contexts is the effect of currents on carcass orientation. Rotation during drift can exaggerate perceived anatomical anomalies. Why? Did it work there? Because the guide emphasizes probability. In North America, documented mountain lion populations exceed 30,000 individuals, yet confirmed attacks on humans average fewer than 10 per year. Fear often exceeds statistical risk. A lesser-known psychological effect influencing eyewitness accounts is the weapon-focus phenomenon, in which attention narrows under stress, reducing peripheral detail accuracy by measurable margins. In controlled studies, the cost remains human. Night expeditions disrupt circadian rhythms. Studies show that chronic sleep restriction below 6 hours per night can impair reaction time comparably to a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05%. Financial cost accumulates too. A fully equipped independent investigator might invest $5,000 to $15,000 in optics, drones, recording gear, and travel. A lesser-known production issue affecting small teams is insurance. Liability coverage for organized outdoor investigations can exceed $1,200 annually, limiting participation. There is also reputational cost. Public association with fringe belief can affect employment in scientific fields. Surveys among biology graduate students in the early 2010s indicated reluctance to engage publicly with cryptid topics for fear of professional stigma. A lesser-known command doctrine shift within some academic circles has been cautious openness to undiscovered megafauna in remote regions, balanced with insistence on extraordinary evidence. Old age of sensational monster hunting is visible in the clarity of modern imaging, with 4K resolution common in smartphones after 2015 and 8K emerging in professional equipment. The excuse of blur has weakened. If a large terrestrial mammal existed in densely populated regions of Europe or North America, population modeling suggests a minimum breeding group of several hundred individuals would be required for genetic viability, a lesser-known supply. Constraint inherent in such a hypothetical population is food intake. A 200-kilogram omnivore would require thousands of calories daily, leaving ecological traces difficult to conceal. Replacement has come not from disbelief, but from biodiversity science. Camera trap networks in tropical forests have documented rare species previously thought extinct, such as the sow photographed in Vietnam in the 1990s. After decades without confirmation, global camera trap studies now generate millions of images annually. A lesser-known design compromise in long-term camera deployments is lens fogging in humid climates, reducing image clarity unless silica desiccant packs are replaced regularly. The legacy of the guide from a monster hunter lies in method rather than myth. Citizen science platforms now use crowdsourced verification. Observations are flagged, reviewed, and either confirmed or corrected. Over time, error rates decline as databases expand. A lesser-known crew training detail in successful citizen science initiatives is the encouragement of negative reporting, logging absence of species as carefully as presence to avoid sampling. Biased militaries and emergency services have borrowed elements of this culture of verification. Search and rescue teams employ grid searches, thermal imaging, and incident command systems originally refined in wilderness investigations. In the United States, the incident command system, formalized after wildfire management reforms in the 1970s, now governs diverse emergency responses. A lesser-known weather impact shaping search success rates is wind speed above 15 knots, which can degrade thermal imaging accuracy by dispersing heat signatures. The guide closes the circle of the profession. It acknowledges that in 2023, more than 8 billion people inhabit the planet, leaving little terrestrial space unobserved. Yet it also notes that deep ocean exploration has mapped only a fraction of seabed at high resolution. The unknown persists, but it shrinks under measurement. A lesser-known test result from deep-sea expeditions using remotely operated vehicles indicates that new species discovery rates remain high below 1,000 meters depth, sometimes several novel organisms per dive in unexplored trenches. What later generations copy is restraint, the discipline of waiting for evidence, of documenting before declaring, has outlived the romance of the hunt. Wildlife conservation campaigns increasingly rely on camera traps and DNA barcoding rather than rifles. A lesser-known medical effect observed in communities once dependent on predator eradication is the rebound of ecosystem health. Reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park in 1995 correlated with measurable changes in riverbank vegetation over subsequent years, illustrating trophic cascade dynamics. The guide from a monster hunter therefore ends not with a trophy, but with a notebook. It is a profession that began with firelight and sharpened steel and matured into spreadsheets and spectrograms. It learned that most monsters dissolve under scrutiny, and that the true danger lies less in claws than in certainty, without evidence. The final lesson is quiet. Step toward the noise, measure it, record it, and accept the answer even if it is ordinary. The dark is wide, but it is not infinite. And the work of those who once hunted monsters has become the work of understanding what was always there.